Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here today for this second CALP Learning webinar. We're just going to wait a minute to make sure everyone is able to join the meeting. While we wait, you can always turn on the interpretation system. We are in a webinar that will be held in both French and English. So we will ask you to click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and then pick which language you would like to follow the meeting in, either French or English. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to get us started. It is a pleasure and a privilege to welcome you here today alongside my colleague Mirko, who is the regional representative for CALP in Western and Central Africa. This is the second webinar on using cash transfers in complicated operational contexts. And we'll be together for an hour and a half for this webinar. Based on the language you would like to follow along in, once again, the meeting will be held in French and in English.
So,
And so you can
hi
use the
everybody.
interpretation function.
Please do use the interpretation function if you need it. So it's at the bottom of your screen, it's on the globe. The webinar will be in French and in English, and I will be hosting today with my colleague Mirko who is a regional representative for Western Central Africa for the CALP network. So really happy to have all of you.
Thank you. I think that we can get started. I see a fair number of people here with us. I will just remind you that, once again, the webinar will be held in French and in English, so please use the interpretation function if you need. Check, check. This is Zach on the English channel. If you can hear me, you are in the English channel. So we will be here for 90 minutes together, an hour and a half for this webinar. And we're going to ask everyone to keep the microphones on mute throughout the meeting so that we can all hear the presenters and the panelists. The webinar will be recorded and shared after we finish up. It will be available on the CALP website. And I would also like to remind everyone to please speak slowly so that the interpreters have time to interpret. Also, if you have any questions, that's great. You can submit them in the Q&A function. And we will do our best to answer them during the panel discussion section of the webinar. You can also use the chat box to introduce yourself, please, and also to react as we go along through the presentations. So here is the agenda for today. It's pretty full. We have a fair number of high quality presentations. We will have a short opening speech from FCDO. We're waiting to see if they are properly connected. And then Mirko, the regional representative, will summarize what we discussed in the first learning webinar, if you didn't have the chance to connect to that. Then we will hear presentations from Kakara in Niger with Mahman, and also from the FACT Foundation in Nigeria with Emmanuel. And each of them will present the work they are doing in their respective regions, or countries rather. Then we will have a facilitated panel discussion where we hope to answer all of your questions. And to further the discussion, and then we will conclude with a bit of a summary and conclusion from the CALP network. So here you have the speakers for today. We're very lucky to have them. We have Maman Mortala, who is the Migration and Humanitarian Emergency Chief with Karkara, who has studied human development in Geneva and has more than 16 years of experience in managing and coordinating humanitarian and development projects, notably using cash transfers in emergency and development situations. We also have Emmanuel Elam Atam with us, who is the executive director and co-founder of the nonprofit organization FACT Foundation in Nigeria. He is an expert in monitoring and evaluation, accountability, and learning. And he has for a long time worked in Nigeria in this area before founding the FACT Foundation. Finally, we are lucky enough to have with us Leah Gaffney, who is the Social Development Advisor for FCDO for the Sahel. And she works on social protection issues and on poverty analysis. She's been working in the sector for a long time in London, Bangladesh, India, and Zambia. Leah, the floor is yours for an opening word.
Hi, everyone. If it's okay, I'm going to speak in English. So, sounds good. Perfect. So thank you so much for inviting me to join today. I think this webinar on cash transfers in complex places such as West Africa is really important. It's a region where humanitarian development needs intersect in complex and urgent ways. My focus at the FCDO is on the Sahel, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our work in the Sahel, which is one of the most fragile regions in the world, where communities across the countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Chad, and Mauritania face convergence of crises. Great, I'm back. Okay, so convergence of crises from armed conflict, forced displacement, food insecurity, and climate shocks. These challenges are not only persistent, but are evolving rapidly, demanding innovative, flexible, and people-centered responses. In this context, the UK has been and will always continue to be a strong advocate for cash-based assistance, both in humanitarian response and in long-term development programming, because cash works. It is efficient, empowering, and adaptable. It allows individuals and families to make choices that reflect their own priorities, whether that's buying food, accessing healthcare, paying school fees, or investing in livelihoods. Through initiatives like the Sahel Regional Fund, where the UK has committed over 33 million in recent years to support local and international partners to deliver life-saving aid and sustainable solutions. This includes for protection services, family planning, and humanitarian assistance, with a strong emphasis on local ownership and community engagement. However, the UK's commitment goes beyond emergency response. It also extends to building long-term resilience through social protection systems. One of the most significant contributions in this space is the UK's support to the Sahel Adaptive Social Protection Programme, a multi-country initiative designed to help governance in the region build shock-responsive, climate-resilient social protection systems. SASP is helping countries to develop tools and infrastructure needed to scale up during crises, while also laying the foundation for inclusive and sustainable development. It reflects the UK's broader vision of linking humanitarian assistance with development goals, ensuring that cash transfers are not just a temporary lifeline, but a stepping stone towards long-term sustainability and self-reliance. Of course, Both of these approaches are not without its challenges. Security risks, limited infrastructure, political sensitivities, and concerns about targeting and accountability all pose real obstacles. We've seen this in Burkina Faso, where cash transfers were suspended in certain regions due to fears of diversion and lack of coordination. These issues underscore the importance of robust safeguards, transparent systems, and strong partnerships. Despite these hurdles, the UK continues to champion cash transfers because the evidence is compelling. Research shows that cash assistance is preferred by most recipients, stimulates local economies, and can be delivered more cost effectively than traditional aid. It is a tool that respects dignity, promotes autonomy, and supports resilience. This webinar is an opportunity to explore these themes in greater depth and underscores the importance of CALP's work and others in the region who it will be really great to hear from. And I'm looking forward to the discussion of what's working, what's not, and how we can collectively improve the design and delivery of cash-based aid programs in fragile contexts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah, for this, for opening the meeting and for highlighting the importance of working together around cash transfers. Also, thank you for highlighting the complicated nature of the situation in the region and the importance of cash transfers for humanitarian issues and supporting social programs. It is my pleasure today to summarize for you what we did in the first webinar. First, I will introduce myself. I am the regional representative of CALP in Western and Central Africa. So today, I will give a short summary before handing it over to our presenters and the panel. What did we talk about in the first webinar? We focused on analyzing administrative obstacles, limitations, reluctance to use cash transfers for certain organizations, as we've already heard. During this second webinar, we really wanted to focus on operational issues more widely, both administrative issues and wider organizational issues. We have two organizations with us, and the national NGO from Mali, Gautla, and another that will speak about Niger and Nigeria. Can we go back one slide, please? So the idea of this webinar series came from a report that was published at the beginning of the year on removing obstacles to cash transfers in the Sahel and beyond. We can share the link in the chat box. In this report, not only did we analyze the potential causes of limitations or barriers that are present in some contexts that hamper cash transfers, but we also talked about the importance of other activities such as advocacy and other things that can help remove these barriers. You can read all of that in the report. Another important aspect was how can we adapt? How can we adapt cash transfer programs when there are new restrictions that pop up in certain difficult contexts? Slide, please. So here is what came out in the first meeting. Cash is really the preferred modality. In the first webinar, we heard, just as Leah just spoke to us, we heard about the importance of maintaining a cash-first approach. So, using cash transfers where and when it's possible, there are a lot of advantages for beneficiaries. It gives them flexibility. There are positive impacts on the entire local economy and community. And in terms of efficiency, we heard a very positive experience from Niger, where they compared their program, where they distributed goats, and they showed us that when you distribute cash for buying animals, beneficiaries are able to negotiate better prices, and they're also able to select the animals that are the healthiest. We also heard alternatives to vouchers, which are important for the region. We talked to not only, cash transfers aren't the only important tool. Vouchers help us maintain flexibility and allow beneficiaries to have some choice in the matter. But they don't have the total value added of cash transfers. There's also the multiplying effect, which has a net positive impact on the entire local market economy. In-kind aid is really a last resort. That is what we discussed. And among all the different alternatives to cash transfers, if those aren't possible, if none of the alternatives are possible, then we can use in-kind vouchers. And that decision may be made based on security, market feasibility, the local legal framework, or the preferences of the people on the ground. Slide, please. We also heard some programmatic recommendations, such as we need a flexible approach when it comes to cash transfers. When whether that's e-transfers or cash in hand transfers, you need flexibility. There are also vouchers, e-vouchers, and others. We also heard that preparation is an essential step to these programs. And I would like to cite the experience that we heard from Mali, where they said that was a key to the success of their program, was working with local authorities. That made it a lot easier for them to do their work. We also heard that coordination is critical. The cash working group and the clusters can facilitate this coordination, especially when it comes to analyzing and calculating transfer values, and also to help us have a more clear and coordinated discussion with authorities. That's another important kind of coordination. And the clusters and the cash working group are really helpful for that. We also heard about digital solutions. That's a very important aspect. Electronic vouchers increase transparency, help protect personal data, and they're good for more long-term programs, while paper vouchers are good for one-time programs or more short-term programs. We also heard that we still need to do feasibility analyses to see if these digital systems are possible to roll out. Another important point was that in the first webinar, we heard that a good solution, especially in contexts where we can't use cash transfers, that these digital transfers are a good temporary solution until cash transfers become possible. But you need the support from local authorities and to advocate to them. And then this is my last slide. As I said, in the first webinar, we concentrated on these few bullet points on regulatory and administrative limits. And we'll be talking about other ones, security, or the impact of insecurity rather, especially when we work in zones that are hard to access, where people don't trust cash because of political instability. We'll also talk about operational and technical limits when you have low coverage of financial services or low digital access or other factors that can make cash voucher distribution difficult. We can also look at limitations when it comes to coordination and acceptance when there are problems with inflation, for example, and prices are going up, or liquidity problems. That said, I would like to hand it over to our presenters, to Mahman Murtela from the Karkara organization for the first presentation. Mahman, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mirko. Hello to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share the experience of Karkara and our experience with cash transfers. Karkara is a local association which was created in 1992 in Niger. Since 2010, we have been working a lot with cash transfers. Slide, please. As you know, in Niger, we're living in a very complicated context. Why is that? Because not only do we have food insecurity in almost all regions of the country, these crises are also recurring. It's almost every year, every 2 years, there are food crises, agriculture crises, and there's also general insecurity, both around Difa and around Lake Chad, also in Maradi on the border with Nigeria, and in Tawala on the border with Algeria and Mali, and of course in Tilaberi, another border zone, and that is where we're working most directly. This has caused many people to be displaced, and we work a lot with internally displaced persons. And we're doing our best to help them with cash transfers and with basic goods. So the problems that we're facing are insecurity, a low level of access to humanitarian aid, and limited financing. And I know that we're all working with limited financing. There's also the issue of the need for assistance. We need assistance that is fast and flexible, and cash transfers help with that because they are a very flexible tool. They help communities, and they are also quick to distribute so that we can help these communities quickly. Slide, please. Why do we use cash transfers? Cash transfers allow us to respect the dignity and choice of households and communities. We're giving them the choice of what they will do with the money, how they will use these resources. That is one of the main reasons that we prefer to use cash transfers. They are also fast. When you use cash transfers, you don't need to organize a whole big logistics campaign. And everyone on the ground has recognized this. Cash transfers also help us to reduce logistic costs, of course. We're not losing money setting up logistics infrastructure. And in the areas where we work, after we do a cash distribution program, all of the markets in the region become more dynamic. People are able to go to the markets and buy what they need. So that's a really important thing to highlight, this issue of making local markets more dynamic. And that's a difference that we see compared to distributing basic goods. With cash transfers, it really vitalizes the local market economy. Slide, please. How has our approach to cash transfers evolved in Niger and over time, especially within Karkara? When we started with our project, alongside our partners, we were doing direct cash transfers. And we were using a cash for work model. And so we had to mobilize our teams to check that the activities were finished and to send someone with the cash on site. And so it was very direct, but it also created risks for the person who was acting as courier for the cash transfers. But back in the 2010s, we didn't have as many security issues, so this kind of program was possible. There were some other limitations which continue today. There is limited access to some areas. And then there are also the requirements of our funders. And we need to make sure that we are being transparent in how we're using resources and making sure that beneficiaries are receiving the transfers they have a right to. And so over time, our distribution model has changed. And we're moving towards a model where we are distributing vouchers that have a monetary value. And that allows us to give monetary value to beneficiaries. And it took some time to get this model set up. Now, we are mostly using vouchers that are good for a predefined list of essential items. This is especially true in the Tillaberi region, where we tested this area in Ayaru and Tillaberi. We tested this model with merchants. And this model has many different advantages. It allows us to have proper traceability, to show the government that we're being transparent, and allows us to provide assistance in a continual fashion to these communities that have that have a lot of needs, and also improves traceability for all of these programs. Slide.
What are the approaches that we have used? I'll come back to what I've said. Since the food crisis in 2010, we have put in place several projects for money transfers. There were different projects with different conditions, or sometimes not unconditional, like grants that we could give to teenage girls. This is what we would do, or to teenagers in general, actually. And for girls, after 3 months, we would give them some money transfers, and this was cash, so that they could be still in school. Now, what we've done is, with a lot of other partners, we had a different project. We had to work on a project funded by the EU, where we would fund various activities locally within the context of Nexus. We've also had DFID funded projects. So since 2010, we've actually worked with many different partners. We have had many money transfer projects with them. Now, the vouchers this is something that we've worked with on different projects with several partners as well. The use of mobile money and microfinance institutions was also crucial. We've done that through the World Food Program and other partners. We've used different phone companies through which we have signed conventions, or with which we've signed conventions. This enabled us to give resources to communities. It was a way of saying that from back then to now, we've seen major evolutions in terms of money transfer. We've been trying to keep track of all these evolutions and trying to adapt along with the partners that fund us as well, because the context has changed. As I've said, we've had a lot of experiences, and I've mentioned a few of them, where we directly distributed cash to the beneficiaries. This has some risk, but it meets the demands of the buyers. For example, we've had some activities if we wanted to target specific populations where instead of targeting different villages, we've had to get beneficiaries to move to safer areas, which also incurs some problems because we've committed to targeting certain areas and we've been told, oh, you should go to these areas, and then we figure out that it's not possible. So we had a choice to make of abandoning these communities or getting them to go to a different place so that we could actually distribute the cash. We had one beneficiary from one funder where this beneficiary said she had to move in order to be a part of the target population, or she had to make the trip. But it's better if the beneficiaries can stay where they are. Before making these decisions, we talk with the stakeholders, specifically the authorities, because the local authorities are the ones who will also make these decisions with us. And for the case of Niger, we're trying to reach the beneficiaries. And let's see, major challenge that we're having. We have one example of this, still with the WFP and the crises project. We've signed a convention with different business owners who were tasked with distributing a certain number of items to beneficiaries. We gave them the tools to be able to help out women, and it was women and children. This project was around malnutrition. We've trained these communities so that they could identify the best items to use. As counterpart, if they have cash, for example, they have identified a certain number of items that were necessary for these beneficiaries, and it was also based on the value of these items. So they go to these businesses, they show the items, and then we actually support the beneficiaries in order to help them identify what they need, what items they need. The business owner is there locally and is being supported. Secondly, the beneficiary is able to recognize which foods have which nutritional value for them. This also is empowering for them because you also need to look at multiplying factors that you can put in place to help everyone. So we've reinforced the local economy and helped out the beneficiaries. This shows you the importance of injecting cash into these communities. This is something that we can say is very much appreciated by all stakeholders. Here are the challenges that we have. These are linked to our context. There are some zones when there's no phone signal. And this is really difficult because we need technology. If we need to use a tool for the transactions, the money transactions, in places where there's no phone signal, it's a bit difficult. It can cause delays. There's also the security risks for the beneficiaries, and not only for them, but for the teams too, because they must go to these communities and give them the information, especially if we need to tell them about the money transfer programs. We need to go there and be able to discuss this with them. One of the major challenges is the security risk. If you take the case of Niger, all of the partners are not necessarily able to go where they're supposed to go. There's also the low financial inclusion of women. In some zones, women are not managing to have enough resources so that there can be, well, in order to meet their needs. So I wanted to talk about this a bit further. There's some people that we've had to give some funding to, and they would receive cash, and this cash that they would receive really enabled them to diversify in the economy. There are some women who have gotten some resources with which they were able to buy some tools in order to meet their own needs, in order to have their own businesses. Sometimes it can be about buying animals. There's this social pressure too in terms of sharing cash. So the matter of distribution is one that we have to discuss with the communities, and we have a lot of actions in this regard. In terms of the lessons learned, here's what we can say. The participatory targeting and gender rather sensitive targeting is very important with the involvement of stakeholders. This is how we can get very good results. We also need a strong partnership with telecommunications carriers and also with microfinance institutions. So there's a synergy between humanitarian players and the private sector. We're trying to get the private sector to understand the importance of humanitarian efforts. Yes, the private sector wants to maximize profit, but they can also understand the situation for people who are in need. There's also a better coordination with humanitarian players, because then we know who does what and how. There's also different training opportunities and other measures that have allowed beneficiaries to acquire the necessary skills to maximize the advantages of the income generating activities. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to stop here. You've gone over 2 minutes over time. So unless you want to take just a few seconds, this is the last slide. Okay. These are just the recommendations. They're clear. It's to reinforce the financial inclusion of women, diversify modalities, capitalize on and share good practices, and keep on informing people. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we're going to get to the next step. Thank you for telling us about Niger. I'm not going to summarize this. It's very complex in the field lots of money transfers that were put in place, lots of different possibilities. Thank you for these various examples. I'll let you ask your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A box. And during the panel, Maman will be with us and able to answer these questions. Now, I will give the floor to Emmanuel, who's going to talk about the experience in Nigeria, again, in a context with lots of challenges.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Emmanuel and I work with FACT Foundation. FACT Foundation is a Nigerian research organization. We focus on research, learning, and we do a lot of GIS work as well. A couple of months ago, we were engaged by the Ministry of Health in Nigeria to do mapping across all of the northwestern states. So if you're familiar with Nigeria, you know the Northeast is the most popular region in terms of the humanitarian situation, and of recent, unfortunately, some of these issues have been moving to the Northwest. So we were in the Northwest to do a mapping activity for the Ministry of Health in Nigeria. And whilst we're there, we decided to include some research. We decided to do some research work. And this research work broadly covered 3 themes. So we looked at access to basic services. We looked at climate impact scan. And one of the components we looked at was cash visibility and market functionality. And of that component, I'm here to present a few of our findings with you. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned already, so if you're familiar with the Northwest of Nigeria, you know it's currently facing a complex mix of armed conflicts together with displacement, economic instability, with rising humanitarian needs across most of the communities. And amidst this, we can see that implementing partners in the region are focusing a lot more on cash-based intervention, not wanting to replicate a similar structure that we have in the Northeast with the Northwest. So whilst we're there on this mission that I've spoken to you about, we decided to conduct this assessment. So we spoke to 513 community leaders across 138 local government areas, and this covers 481 communities. So essentially, we were in every local government in the Northwest, and in each of these local governments, we tried to assess 3 or 4 communities in each of these local governments, and we're able to get a mix of urban and rural settlements. So the states are Jigawa, Kano, Katsina, Kebbi, Sokoto, and Zamfara. So the findings I'll be presenting here is going to be focusing on this particular region and this assessment. So we found out that, of course, there's rising food price, which is shrinking household income, and is also compounded by other like climate and structural issues as well. And communities, especially that were in inaccessible areas, as you'd expect, had least access to functional markets. Broadly, the Northwest communities are agrarian, so farming, fishing, livestock, and other type of agricultural activities were the main sources of income for people. So even where you had other types of commercial activity, they were all still linked back to agriculture. And of the key informants or the respondents that we spoke to, they reported only about 4% of households were part of any type of social protection program. So our assessment also showed that most communities, over 85% of communities, had access to a functional market. And for this assessment, we defined a functional market as where people can access essential items safely and at reasonable prices. So now we are going to move on to the key findings. And as I mentioned already, for this conversation, I think what is relevant for this conversation is 2 of those findings. My colleague will drop the link for the main reports in the chat so that you can go and look at the other things we have in there. Yeah. So overall, as you would expect, cash was the predominant modality preference. So we asked communities, so in the case of an emergency and you need support, how would you prefer the support to come, in what form? And overwhelmingly, cash was the most predominant. You can see that in-kind had only less than 8%. And then also very significant is communities telling us they want a mix of both cash and in-kind and other forms of modality. And you can understand this, especially given the context there. So you're talking about a fragile context with security issues, infrastructure, access issues, and even macroeconomic issues like inflation, influences people's preferences. So in this instance, cash only might mean they might not get items they want from their local market, or inflation might erode the value of that cash only very quickly. So these are all kind of the reasons we got for community preference. And just zooming in a bit more, you see that Sokoto specifically had the highest share of people wanting cash only. And again, this is all tied to the reasons I've mentioned above. Next, please. The next finding we want to discuss, which to us is very relevant to the conversation we are having today, is one of the questions we asked about the means of receiving and transferring money. Yeah, that is tied to financial access. So we asked the community what was the most common means of receiving and transferring money available in their community. And predominantly and overwhelmingly, it was POS. So POS is point of sale. These are electronic ways, agents that receive and transfer money using an electronic device that is connected to the internet. They're able to hold some amount, reasonable amount of cash, and community members come to them to get cash. And in the region, this is primarily driven by fintech companies and not your conventional banks. And why was this predominant? Because it offered proximity, it was close to the people, speed, and most of these POS agents are community members that people already know. There's that trust. So it really, really helped. Yeah. On average, your conventional bank or ATM was only reported to be available in about 10 to 15% of the communities that we assessed. So this tells you how dominant these POS agents are. People also use a lot of cash in hand, especially for small items or routine purchases. And quite interestingly, cooperative society and traditional savings system was not reported as much. It was very, very little. Again, this is also an opportunity for any cash program to leverage on. Next slide, please. Yeah, so zooming deeper into these POS agents, the role they play, and how it can be leveraged. So these POS agents, as I've mentioned already, are widespread and available in both rural and urban areas. They provide quick access to cash with strong community trust. So what we found was that a lot of these POS agents are also vendors selling other items. But you also have scenarios whereby you have people where you have a case where POS was their only business, and they were local, they were based in the community, so there was a lot of trust. Yeah, people could, even if transaction failed, they could come back on a later time and all of that. So that's one real advantage it has. And then, yeah, proximity, since the conventional banks and ATMs were far away from people, POS was closed, so it reduced travel time, distance, and all the associated risk. But unfortunately, there are some limitations. And one which you'd expect is liquidity challenge. Yeah? So again, these are small vendors. If you want to scale up and do a large scale cash program in these communities, how are they able to cope? Are they able to support this? Do they have the liquidity? These are some of the limitations. and then it's very dependent on mobile connection. Yeah, and in a lot of these areas, in a significant portion of these areas, mobile penetration and mobile internet penetration is still very, very, very low. So that's a limitation. So the next is exposure to risk. Of course, there's always that risk of theft, extortion, and roadblock. Now, how can we leverage this in our programming? So we have this widespread network of cash providers, basically, that are currently serving as the anchor for financial transactions in most of those communities. If you're going in with any cash intervention, I think it's quite reasonable for us to think around how we can leverage on these opportunities. Yeah. And one of them is to partner with this POS network. So in our finding, we found out that MoneyPoint and OPay were the most predominant companies that are providing these services in the region. I would say almost more than 90% of the market. MoneyPoint is a Nigerian fintech company, while OPay, I think, is a Chinese fintech company in Nigeria. So cash programming that is connected to these people in any way, or I think will go a really long way. And there's a limitation that we found as well as regards to the fees. We found out that the fees could be a bit high in some of the communities, especially when these communities are a bit further or a bit isolated. So working together with this type of companies, these fintech companies, we will be able to negotiate some friendly fee structure for any type of humanitarian intervention. And through them, again, we can also support to provide liquidity for these rural agents. In fact, we found in one community, we saw an NGO implementing a livelihood program where they were training people to be POS agents and giving them the initial capital to start. Yeah, so apart from it being an opportunity to create the livelihood source, it also would provide this type of services that would support CVA or cash implementation in this hard-to-reach area. And then, the linkage between digital cash, whatever cash platform, delivery platform we use, this can also be easily linked through to the POS so that we can expand access and then gradually close inclusion gaps. So overall, strengthening and adapting these POS agents will be really beneficial for scaling up humanitarian cash program in the region. Yeah, we know that the POS network, they play a very important role in supporting financial access across this region. Next slide, please. So let me just close with some more broader recommendations as per the assessment that we did. I think the first thing is just to say regular adjusting of transfer value to inflation is quite key, because the main reason why we have a significant people choosing mixed modality, it was because of inflation. Yeah, they were worried that, okay, you give me cash, prices are going up. Am I not better off getting some of these items directly and then a bit of cash to solve my other needs? So the combination of the dignity and choice aspect of it, and then the actual access to the items or necessity that has to be put into consideration. And of course, as I've spoken already, leveraging on the widespread POS agent networks to implement cash programs. And then very importantly, designing security sensitive delivery systems in fragile states like Sokoto and Zamfara. Again, we know these places are security prone and we understand the situation in this area. So our delivery model has to take this into account. Again, as I've mentioned, using a hybrid model in situations where the markets are weak and fragile and market functionality is weak. So we also went to a lot of communities whereby access was a challenge, poor infrastructure and all of that. And I had mentioned poor mobile and internet penetration as well. So in those kind of contexts, relying fully on cash might not be feasible at this point. So a hybrid model might work best in those scenarios. And then investing in digital inclusion and protection sensitive programming. And then this is kind of like the last recommendation as per the research side of things. If we want to do future research in this particular region, some of the things that we can focus on is transfer value indexing, which is quite key. And then also research around the optimal use of CVA to respond in complex settings. Yeah. So these findings are part of like a broader research. So unfortunately, we couldn't go deeper into the cash visibility and market functionality issues that I'm sure would have been all be excited to hear in this presentation. Currently, we are exploring avenues to expand this assessment and make it more regular and routine. But yeah, this is the key findings we are able to present in this meeting. And finally, just to say, Fact Foundation, we are a research organization based in Nigeria, and we do a lot of this type of large-scale assessments. My colleague will be dropping the link to our website. You can see all the support we provide in Nigeria. I'll stop here for now and leave I'll be able to take all of your questions or comments during the plenary session. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. So much thing to unpack, and it was great to see, despite the very challenging environment, that you are still a lot of question on design, that you are doing research on it, and it's a lot of clapping coming also to you at the moment. So yeah, please stay with us. We will need you for the panel discussion. Already have quite a lot of questions on that in the chat, in the Q&A box.
Thank you for all these presentations. We're now going to move on to the panel discussion. Please don't hesitate to keep on adding your questions. Please don't hesitate to react to whether in the chat or in the Q&A box. And for this part, we're going to have one more panelist. We have our two excellent panelists, Emmanuel and Maman, who are going to stay with us to answer questions. And a third person, Mr. Samuel Seth, who works at Caritas Germany and is the technical lead for a group in the north of Nigeria. He's got a lot of experience with different challenges, humanitarian challenges. And to moderate this panel, we have with us Lionel Ouedraogo, who is an expert in multi-sectorial monetary transfers, over 20 years of experience in food security and economic issues. He is officially certified with the CALP network and has experience in Burkina Faso, where he is a regional council or advisor rather for West Africa and Central Africa. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. And thank you to our presenters, Mahman and Emmanuel. I won't go back over what they have already presented since we are limited in the time we have together, but I would like to say that Mahman was able to present the important work done by his NGO in Niger. He has a lot of experience with the operationalization of cash transfers in difficult contexts. He also pointed out the importance of cash transfers even in difficult contexts. And he talked about how their use of this modality has changed over time as the local context has changed. He also spoke about some challenges that they are facing and presented solutions to that allowed them to adapt. Emmanuel, in his presentation, spoke to us about the results of a very important study from the northwest of Nigeria and about the feasibility study done to study the possibility of using cash transfers in difficult contexts. he also spoke about the mechanism to use points of sale as an appropriate mechanism, or rather, not appropriate, but as a possible mechanism for distributing cash transfers in difficult contexts. He spoke about the results they found and the fact that they're going to keep using cash transfers in this part of Nigeria, with recommendations to shore up the framework of this system. Thank you both for your presentations. Now we will begin the panel discussion, and we also have with us Seth, who hasn't gotten the chance to introduce himself yet, but we'll let him introduce himself now so that he can share what the NGO Caritas does in Cameroon and to open the panel discussion. Seth, if you are ready, you have 3 minutes to introduce yourself and your organization.
Thank you very much, Lionel, and good afternoon. And it's great to be here. My name is Seth, Manu Samuel Seth, and I work for Caritas Germany here in Northeast Nigeria. And just to say that when we talk about access, and in a challenging context like Nigeria, where we have the crisis that has been going on for a while now, and security issues, sometimes you have government restrictions and policies coming into play and all this. It could be very, very difficult to implement cash in these kind of situations. But then over time in Nigeria, we have been able to navigate these challenges and to find ways in order to go about it. Caritas Germany, for one, in Nigeria, one key way we have identified in navigating these challenges, especially as regards access constraints, that is being able to access the local communities. A lot of them are inaccessible due to the security crisis, is the fact that we have decided to have very strong engagement with local and national organizations. Now, you have organizations that already are part of these communities. And so where you have limited or restricted access, you find out that the local and national partners are able to go there because these are their communities. They have grown there. They know the geographic of the location, and they are very familiar with it. Now, sometimes also you have challenges that come from the government. For example, sometimes back in Nigeria, we had issues where the government brought about the cashless policy. Prior to now, what we did basically waited for the beneficiaries, then go down to the communities and go and disburse this cash on the table. But then with the cashless policy being introduced by the government, all that had to change. And so partners had to come up with new ways. And so we had to go into prepaid cards, we had to go into vouchers, paper vouchers, electronic vouchers, digital money, in order to circumvent that challenge that we had. But then one key thing also that is very, very important is that we also, through the cash working group, have established a very good relationship with the government. And so we are able to sit with the government and discuss some of these challenges. For example, during the cashless policy, when we had issues with cash disbursement, we were able to secure a waiver from the government to allow humanitarian actors to still be able to move cash to support the people that are in need. So these things are very, very important. Now, another strategy that we have also adapted as Caritas Germany is that when we look at cash programming, we also think the future, because it's not all about having access now. Will the access still be there tomorrow? And will the access continue? And so one thing we have tried to do is to link our interventions with the social protection systems of the government. Now, in doing so, you are planning for sustainability. And so you have a system whereby once you are done with your work, the access is long lasting. And so, for example, you could decide to do cash interventions through prepaid cards, right? Now, but the challenge with that is that when the organization pulls out, you find out that it pulls out with its access. So, but when you are implementing, you make use of the immediate access you have while working towards a more sustainable access, then it helps you a lot, such that even if your organization is no more implementing in those locations, you find out that other partners that come in are able to build on what you have established to continue with it. And so we always encourage partners, for if we go into locations and we're doing cash programming, while we do those cash programs, we try to ensure that the population there are banked. We ensure that they have access to the conventional banks in those locations. And we also ensure that we work with the local structures. When Emmanuel was talking earlier, he made mention of the point of sale operators, the POS operators. Now, unfortunately, in a lot of communities in Northeast Nigeria, you would not have financial institutions there, and access to cash is very limited. And then, unfortunately, the people are not a banked population. And so when you go there, they also do not have bank accounts. So a lot of times the way you are able to navigate this is by using those structures, especially the POS. They are always in those little communities and people are able to have access to them. So you leverage on them and make use of them. Now, one particular thing also that I have found very important to the work that Caritas Germany does is its engagement with the community, because sometimes the access or the barrier is coming from within the community itself. You find out that there are certain power holders within the community that serve as barrier for the community people to access funds because they want to benefit in monetary terms from the interventions. Now, we have had such challenges, but with engagement with the community, proper community engagement, dialogue, and communication, two-way communications, we have been able to overcome these challenges. So definitely there are challenges. There are a lot of challenges, both in terms of security, both in terms of administrative, both in terms of communication, both in terms of access to services. But then when you sit down and look at the situation, you are able to come up with innovations like we have done. I would put a pause here, and I am hoping that as we continue in the conversation, wherever you have questions, I would be able to address them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Seth, for this introduction. I would like to remind everyone in the audience that we have already received over 100 questions when people signed up. We also received a lot of questions live during the presentation so far. So it just goes to show what interest there is in this topic, and also how big this challenge is. We have tried to organize different learning sessions that will respond to the interests of the audience, but as I said, time is limited today. So my first question, therefore, is for Emmanuel. When we talk about points of sale, using points of sale for cash transfers, it's not clear that this is useful for everyone, or in all contexts. So can you tell us in simple language, what do you mean by point of sale and the mechanisms that you're using to facilitate cash transfers, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. So doing our research in the Northwest specifically, we found out that in almost all the communities that we visited, there was point of sale. So point of sale, point of sale they are service providers that use an electronic device to receive and then transfer cash. Yeah. And this was led mostly by fintech. And why this worked really well in most communities that we went to was because there was mobile connectivity and internet connectivity. And these are the two main, should I say, infrastructure you would need for this to be available in a community. So as Seth was making his point earlier on, he did mention that this is not available in areas in the Northeast, and is largely due to that. Yeah. The unfortunate thing is this point of sale are available across most of the communities, but the communities where we had the least, should I say, availability of point of sales are communities that have been directly impacted by a security incident. So where you have communities that were receiving internal displaced people mostly had point of sales agents available in those communities, but communities that were directly impacted by a security incident, we discovered that those communities did not have point of sale. And again, these attacks come with destruction of infrastructure and all of that. So to frame it broadly, point of sales agents are individuals basically that are in the community collect and transfer cash, which we can leverage for any cash programming. But unfortunately, in a situation where there's security challenge that affects these two infrastructure, mobile connection and mobile internet connection, then it's difficult and you typically would not find them in those areas. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for clarifying. I would like to stay with you now. I have a few other questions for you. The outcomes of your evaluation showed that there is a preference among these communities for cash transfers, for cash as a modality, and also that they prefer mixed modalities, both cash and in-kind, at a fairly equal percentage. Why do you think that people do not prefer only cash, given that this is the modality that is the most flexible and has the fewest limitations? Why do you think that preference exists the way it does?
Okay, the number one reason we got was inflation. If you're familiar with Nigeria and the current context, we have, say, 38 to 40% inflation. We asked the question actually, where we asked communities if there have been increase in prices, food prices in the last 3 months, and over 95% of communities reported that yes, that prices of items or food and items have increased in the last 3 months. So inflation was the number one reason. So they're saying if cash is fixed, then by the time they receive it, it might not be sufficient enough for them. So they'll prefer something where they get some of these items in person. And then the second one was tied around market functionality. Yeah. So infrastructure to allow inflow and outflow of goods and services to this market. Are these markets able to accommodate the demand and all of that? So that was the second main thing that was mentioned. So most communities prefer cash. Cash overall is most preferred because of the benefits, yeah, the dignity, the flexibility, the choice. But in terms of when you're not talking about actual access to these items, then that's where it becomes dicey. People would rather have the items than have cash and have the flexibility when there are no items for them to buy. Yeah, over.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And please stay with us. We may come back to you after we hear from your colleagues. Now, I would like to go over to Niger to ask a question that comes from the audience. We know that targeting is essential when we use cash transfers as a modality. Do you have any advice for us or for humanitarian actors about how to do targeting in difficult contexts, especially for programs that use cash transfers, knowing that this modality requires a good knowledge of beneficiaries and perhaps the collection of personal data? So you need a database that is updated. So what do you think about that, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this question. Targeting is key for a whole project because if targeting fails, then the project is doomed to fail. And one of the first factors is for all stakeholders to be involved, and especially the beneficiaries, first and foremost, because these are who we're doing this for. when you have something for a beneficiary, you have to understand what means you're going to use to bring what you're trying to provide. First is the matter of availability. You can bring cash to a community, but does this community have access to this cash? Can this community use this cash where it is put at their disposal? On the other hand, when you're talking about stakeholders, there are local authorities that are there. They can make things easier. If you look at the context of Niger and all of the work that we're doing, we need the local authorities to accept what we're doing. In terms of the beneficiaries, first, they have to determine where we can go and how we're going to proceed. Regarding this point, when it comes to cash, the choice of the modality is important. The cash that we can distribute in Tillabéri, for example, at some point, the local authorities didn't want us to distribute cash. We wanted to, and they said, no, no cash, because they didn't know how we would do it and whether the money would really reach the beneficiaries and how the money would be used. Would the money be used in a rational way? So we've had to inform the local authorities and raise awareness to get them to understand that we've done a proper targeting, that we've used some information that they put at our disposal, that there were some community beneficiaries and partners. There was also this segregation. For example, in our organization, we're here to mobilize communities, to support them. Other players, like microfinance institutions, are there so that once we have targeted the populations, they will provide the financial assistance. And then there's the use of technology, because we're using this technology. Everything has to be synchronized. We do the distribution directly like that. So all of the matters of transparency and involvement of all the stakeholders are key to the success of this. So you must have all the stakeholders involved from beginning to end. This is what I can say to answer this. Thank you very much, Maman. Second question for you, if you'll allow me. In a difficult context, the problem of availability of financial service providers is crucial, especially having enough cash at the points of distribution. What advice would you give to humanitarian players, especially when you have large-scale programs in this regard? We're always going to talk about Niger here. We've had different experiences. At some point, I've gone through businesses, because businesses could act locally. We could sign conventions with them, and they would be the intermediary. But there's a whole process upstream. Today, we use microfinance institutions the most. And as you said, unfortunately, many such institutions do not have their representatives in different areas. When you're talking about large scale, they're the ones who can mobilize the funding and the teams at that level. There are small microfinance institutions that exist, but they do not have the right capacity. When you have microfinance institutions that are more large scale, they can manage to mobilize teams everywhere there's a need so that we can roll out this aid. I was talking about the example of our organization that works a lot with one such institution. We do this in several regions. We work with the same microfinance institutions that have the capacity to mobilize a lot of teams at the same time. And this is how we're able to coordinate our actions. This is why there needs to be more communication with all of the stakeholders, really good planification with all of the stakeholders, and this is how you solve problems. And the authorities as well, because we're working with governments, so local governments must be involved. We communicate with them. We have to keep this communication open, and this is how we can also face these challenges. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maman. Please stay with us, and we could come back to you if time allows. For now, let us turn to Caritas Cameroon with Seth. The humanitarian context, especially using cash today, is marked by restrictions, suspensions by local governments or governments in general. As someone acting in the field, what recommendations would you have for humanitarian players to avoid these risks of restrictions and suspension of services, of using cash?
Thank you very much, Lionel, and Caritas Germany in Nigeria. And so just to say that in this context, to avoid some of these restrictions that might be imposed by the government, firstly, I would strongly recommend that humanitarian partners work closely with the government. There are policies that are in place. For example, the policy that you need, if you're moving cash, you need to talk to the government, you need to inform the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, for example, in Nigeria, that you are moving these funds. Now, you need to maintain that relationship with the government so that they are aware of the program, the activities that you are doing. Now, for areas where there is difficult access because of security concerns, it's also very important that you engage with the security forces. You need to communicate them and say, hey, we have this activity, we are going into this location, so that they are aware that you are doing an activity in a particular location. Now, if not, they are able to really frustrate the work you're doing. And if they're not aware, they could actually stop the activity from happening. So these communications are very key, and they are also very, very important. Another key thing I would also advise is that we need to bring the government more on board. For us in Nigeria, what we have set out to do is that in the cash working group meetings, we have the government coming in to be part of the chair. We have the government coming to sit in discussion forums. For example, when we were developing the Joint Market Monitoring Initiative for Northwest Nigeria, we invited the government, the Federal Bureau of Statistics, the National Bureau of Statistics. They came and sat down with humanitarian partners and sector leads to sit down and say, hey, this is what we want to achieve. They brought in their contributions. Humanitarian partners brought in their contributions. Now, at the end of the day, you have a document that has been jointly produced. So the government will not kick against it because it was part of the production of the document. And then the humanitarian partners also accept the document because they had contributed to the development of the document. So this is very, very essential that we carry the government along in everything that we do, because we really, really need their buy-in. Another thing is to see how we can integrate the work that we do with government systems. I spoke earlier about social protection, because once the government sees that, hey, the humanitarian cash program we are doing taps into the social protection program of the country, then it knows that it is strengthening the economy of the country itself. It is strengthening the social protection program, and it knows that this is beneficial for the government. It will not kick against it. Rather, it will find ways to support your program because it sees that in the long run, it helps the programs that the government has already put in place. So these are key areas where I feel would really, really help us to avoid this kind of kicks and restrictions from government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I still have 1 minute. I'd like to ask one last question in terms of money transfers in difficult areas. So, Seth, can you tell us what the main risks are and how to mitigate those risks?
One of the main risks that we have in money transfers and difficult to reach areas in Nigeria is actually security risks. Now, there is the risk that when you disburse cash because of the security challenge you have in Nigeria, after the cash disbursement, you might have the armed opposition group coming to raid the communities and take away the cash that has already been disbursed. Now, that is a major risk. But one way that we could actually go around this is by the time you have a system for cash disbursement that is not physical, neither does it provide the platform for people to identify those that have benefited from the disbursement. For example, you're able to connect your beneficiaries with financial institutions. They become banks, they have access to bank accounts. That means that you could stay in your office and initiate the transfer. The transfer will go right into their accounts. Now they have access to the ATMs or the prepaid cards that are already with them. And at their own time, at their own leisure and flexibility, they are able to either go and get cash that they would use or go to the market and use those cards for purchases. Now, that will now anonymize your beneficiaries so that you don't make them targets, right? Because anybody could go to the market, anybody could withdraw funds. By seeing a person, you don't necessarily know that this person has received a cash transfer. So, but when we don't put these mitigation measures in place, then we might end up exposing them to risks that they might not be able to mitigate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Miko, do we have more time, Mirko? Do we still have time? There's other very interesting questions, but I know we are limited in terms of time. I think we can close the session here. Says Lionel, says Mirko, rather. Thank you very much, Lionel, for having moderated this panel. It was very interesting. The discussions were very interesting. Unfortunately, as always, we're limited because of the time. Here's our suggestion. We can share with you all the minutes. We're going to gather all of the questions that you have asked, and we're going to ask the presenters if they can give you an answer so that you'll be able to have the answer to most of the questions that you've asked today. Thank you again to all of you. I would like to share with you some takeaways. First of all, thank you to the presenters. These presentations were very interesting. Here's some takeaways. There's no doubt about the necessity of always keeping those cash transfers as a priority, as a first choice. All presenters have talked about the positive aspects of these cash transfers. For example, for Karkara, we've heard that it was the choice of the community. It's very important. It's very fast, especially in response to a humanitarian crisis. There's also a co-efficiency. It's less costly. Emmanuel also mentioned some of the same concepts. We've also seen the point of view of Caritas Germany in Nigeria, where it was explained that it was very important for all of the community to have this cash transfer, and it goes well beyond the assistance that you give to vulnerable populations. And I think it's always important to highlight that. We've also, in all presentations, mentioned the fact that the way you use, or the way you choose to use, has to be based on an analysis of the context, of the feasibility. We've talked about very complex contexts where security aspects limit some interventions. So it's very important to keep in mind the context in the different program areas. The market is very important. That's also what we've heard, especially Emmanuel from Nigeria talked about this. He's talked about the inflation issue. So you have to be sure that you're adapting your cash transfers to these issues like inflation. We've also seen administrative constraints in the regions. This is something that tends to happen in Burkina Faso. This is what we've seen in our opening, but we've seen that in other countries. It's also been mentioned in Nigeria and in other countries. I also wanted to mention something about the point of sale or distribution. This is maybe something that's not familiar for everyone. And maybe in some countries it's described using different terminology, but that also goes to show that depending on the context, there are opportunities to be explored, options that may be different or new, and you can try to use this for the programs. I also wanted to give a few recommendations, if I may, based on your presentations. The fact that cash transfers, when you talk about using cash and vouchers, is a flexible approach, or enables a flexible approach, rather. It enables us to contextualize. We also must work on the preparation. There's things that have to be prepared upstream so that you have this flexibility. We talked about the problem of coordination and working with local authorities, the importance of coordinating properly, and Mr. Maman from Kaka also talked about this. To have proper collaboration with local authorities is crucial, and with security forces as well. We've seen this ourselves in Cameroon, where we have to also collaborate with security forces, because otherwise they can really slow down some cash transfer programs. And finally, the advocacy work is very important as well across the board. This is in link with collaboration with the authorities. So you have to find channels of communication, and sometimes you have to find different arguments to convince and to raise awareness amongst the local authorities. These were the takeaways that I highlighted. I also wanted to thank all of the presenters. I'd like to thank our opening speaker, as well as Maman and Emmanuel Foundation, Samuel for Caritas Germany, and thanks to Lionel especially for having accepted to moderate the panel. This was also our view, to have different moderators. I'd like to thank my colleagues, and thanks to all of you for having interacted, for having also asked all of the questions that you've asked. We're going to do our best to answer most of the questions. And finally, before we close out, I wanted to let you know we're going to share the notes of the webinar online, as well as the presentations. And we're going to share the questions. We're going to send all of the notes, the minutes, to all participants today. Thank you again. This webinar was the second of a series on money transfers in difficult contexts. We're going to end this particular webinar, but we're always here to see if we can organize other events like this in the future for Central and West Africa. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.